We'd like to thank our sponsor, Final Thoughts. Final Thoughts would like to give our listeners a 10% discount on their premium package. Wouldn't you like the peace of mind of hearing from your loved ones just one last time? Well, at Final Thoughts, they can... Mark spooled the volume down as he waited for the commercial to end and his podcast to pick back up. He glanced out the window and was greeted by another sign for Final Thoughts. The company was barely a year old, and already they were everywhere. He turned the podcast back up, but wasn't really paying attention anymore. The traffic moved sluggishly around him, like an artery clogged with plaque. He just knew that it would make him late for dinner, and then Lisa would be upset. She hated it when he was late for dinner. The words of the host were cut off suddenly, as his phone chirped and displayed Lisa's picture on the screen. Mark sighed. She was probably calling to ask when he'd be home. She wouldn't be happy when he told her he was going to be late. He'd worked late every day this week, and she had probably made a big surprise dinner for Friday. He considered ignoring it, but knew that would just lead to a bigger fight. He caught it on the fifth ring. "Hey, hun," he said, trying to sound chipper. "Hi, sweetie." Her voice put Mark on edge. They'd been married almost 7 years, and he'd learned how to read her reasonably well in the early parts of the relationship. Her voice was high, unnaturally sweet, and he could already tell that something was wrong. This was the voice she used when she was upset and trying not to show it, when she had bad news but didn't want to tell it. He almost thought he could hear her holding back tears, but didn't want to say so. "Lisa, is everything okay? How was your day? Did you make any big sales?" That took Mark aback. Lisa wasn't usually interested in his work. "Yeah, I made a few big sales. Mr. Copeland said I'm likely a shoo-in for Employee of the Month." That's fantastic, dear. I'm so proud of you." When she said it, there was a slight wince at the end of the word, and Mark could still swear that she was trying not to cry. She was acting strangely. What was going on over there? As Mark sat in bumper-to-bumper traffic, he couldn't help but imagine that someone with a gun was in his house, telling his wife to call him. Maybe someone had died, Mark thought, and she was trying not to tell him until he got home. As the car ahead moved, Mark took his foot off the brake and accelerated forward enough to stop again. Just up ahead, he could see a road worker holding a sign. This was the gatekeeper for a stretch of road laden with roadmen and trucks. This was the source of the traffic, and Mark cursed loudly, realizing that this would take the better part of an hour to get through. "What's wrong, sweetie?" Lisa asked, in that same overly chipper voice that verged on breaking. "Oh, it's road work, babe. Looks like I won't be home for dinner for at least an hour." She made a sound, and to Mark it sounded like a sob. "Oh, I'm sorry, hon. I was hoping you were a little closer. I had something I needed to tell you." Her words broke apart as she spoke, and Mark was getting kind of worried about what was going on at home. "Lisa, is something wrong? You sound like you're barely able to stop yourself from crying. What's going on?" "I promise you won't get mad. I don't want the last thing I hear to be the sound of you mad." Her words sent a chill through him. "The last thing you hear? What are you talking about?" She paused for a moment, seeming to choose her words carefully before continuing. "Mark, honey, there was an accident." "An accident? What happened?" A car beeped at him, and Mark jittered forward a little bit. He had expected to hear that someone had died, that dinner was burnt, maybe that there was a bill that had come in and it was really bad. He had thought maybe there was a home invader or a kidnapping plot. He had thought of 1,000 different things, but her being hurt was never one of them. Lisa rarely left the house. When she did, it was always to her destination and back again. Lisa's parents had been killed in a car accident about 10 years ago, and it had all but made her a shut-in. "I don't want to talk about it. Can't we just make our last conversation a happy one? I don't want you to remember me like this after I'm gone," she said, finally breaking down. Mark could hear her crying on the other end, and the sound was too much. When the car beeped at him this time, he ignored it. Mark had already stripped off his seatbelt and was climbing out of his vehicle. The driver blared his horn and yelled at him, but Mark didn't care. He was running up the sidewalk, phone pushed against his ear, as he ran for their apartment. His apartment wasn't far from the office, but he always drove because he didn't want to arrive with his suit smelling of sweat in the street. He had always considered the 30 minutes to an hour it took him to get home as his time. Now we just wanted to get home before his wife breathed her last. What happened, dear? Just keep talking to me. Her voice was becoming weaker, but he craved it like a starving man wants a slice of bread. I was dusting the lights. I dust them every Friday. They get so dirty during the week. I was up on a stepladder, and I guess one of the brackets snapped. I fell and hit my head on the table. I saw the blood on the floor and knew it was bad. I'm sorry, Mark. I'm such a klutz. Don't be sorry, he said as he ran up the street. People moved out of his way or they were knocked aside. A woman fell on the curb and her angry voice followed Mark as he ran. Mark passed a policeman and the man tried to stop him. He juked around him and kept running. His apartment was only 3 blocks away and he knew he could make it. I'm scared, Mark. That gave him a burst of speed. Just hold on, I'm almost there, he huffed as he ran across the street, the sound of horns blaring behind him. I feel cold. Please, stay with me, Lisa, he almost cried, tears dripping down his face onto the phone. He could see their apartment building as it loomed in the distance. The gray facade had never looked better to him, and he knew it was only a block away. He ran flat out, his suit coat billowing behind him, his button-up hanging long around his waist. He looked crazed, but he didn't care. He was going to see her. He was going to save her. He was going to be there for her. Mark, she gasped. Her voice had become as fragile as glass. I'm here, honey. There's an ambulance outside the complex, as well as several police cars. What's going on? Has someone called for help? Why didn't you say so? I just wanted to let you know my time's almost up. His breath hitched in. Don't talk like that. We'll have more time. I see paramedics outside. They must be here for you. No, they've already come and got me, Mark. He stopped as he watched them roll out a gurney with a black bag on it. The bag was zipped up, the contents not moving. The paramedics loaded it into the back of an ambulance and closed the door. They rolled away without ever seeing Mark at all. You're hearing my voice because I signed up for Final Thoughts. I know you don't like them, but I wanted you to have some closure if something ever happened to me. I remember how much it messed me up when my parents died, and I never got to say goodbye. I've only got about a minute left, Mark, but I want to tell you that I love you, and I'll always love you. Mark stood on the sidewalk as the cold numbness rushed over him. He was hearing her voice for the last time. She was already gone, already dead, and now he was listening to the last words she would ever say. This was grisly. It was a joke. How could they put a time limit on how long he could spend with his wife? Mark, she whispered, her voice a thin edge of dandelion fluff. He swallowed his emotion. This was his wife's final moments. He didn't want them to be meaningless. I love you too, Lisa. I've always loved you. Goodbye, Mark. I love you, she whispered. She sounded happy. The line went dead. Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thanks so much for joining me for tonight's story. I know this particular story sort of straddles the edge of horror and heartrending, but it's one of my very favorite stories, and probably the only story that's ever made me cry while I wrote it. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope it didn't mess you up too bad. Before we go, let's thank our patrons. Thanks to Leslie Lou Riddle and Janet for being our Spooky Skeleton tier contributors. Thanks to Xaronana for being our Ghostly Reader contributor. And thanks to Glen Jenkins for being our Ghostwriter tier contributor. Thanks, everybody. We just couldn't do it without you. If you too would like to support the show, come on down to Patreon. For just $5 a month, you too can have your name read out at the end of every TikTok and every YouTube video that I do. You can also get your videos a day early by getting them on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So, what are you waiting for? Come on down. We've got books available on Amazon. I always recommend Stragview Stories, which is my collection of prison short stories. It's a pretty good little compilation, and I think you'll really enjoy it. Or any horror reader in your life would probably enjoy a copy. If you'd like a signed copy, let me know. I'd be glad to sign it and send it to you. And it's always a pleasure to see my name in print. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.